Good. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm Hugh. Oh God, there I am. That's from some photo shoot from some ages ago, I think. I'm going to offer you a few reflections. I'm not an expert in brand. I'm not an expert in reputations at all. I'm an academic. I work at UCL, and obviously an inferior brand to Oxford and Cambridge and the others mentioned so far. But I'm an academic. I've had reasonable success. I've probably got 27, 28 papers in Nature, 900 publications, etc. So I sit in that world. I'm a barefoot NHS doctor. I work in a district general in North London, which is an unsexy sort of place to work. And I also direct our research and development department. So I'm sitting a little bit in the nexus of what you've got there. My reflections really are going to be on my personal views on reputation. What is it, does it matter, and why? And some of that I think has been covered, and you are the experts here. You really don't need me to give you a lecture about this. Does it matter? You've just heard that it matters. It matters in the NHS and for academic clinical centres, for partnerships, for research and innovation and collaboration. And it matters for patients' flow, people wanting to come to you and referrals, but also for recruitment and retention of high quality staff who will continue to want to work in that organisation and grow it. Success breeds success. I had to try to work out what I thought reputation was if I was going to try and talk about it for 15 minutes. It occurs to me that, as a non-expert, the first bit is there has to be some measure of the quality. We're talking about a metric of good or bad. Is this person a psychopath or are they nice? Is this company valuable or is it about to go bust? There's got to be some quality metric in it. But of course, there also has to be this brand element. There has to be an awareness, because one of you in this room might be a world champion and expert in something, but you have no reputation in this room because none of us know about it. So there is a communication issue here. Some of that, I think, with patients leaks out naturally about what's high quality, and across the health sector as well. We all know who's good, and that's why you've asked the right questions of the people who work in it. For transparency, I think Oxford is an absolutely fantastic centre. The reputation of Oxford with me comes from my interaction with the clinicians and scientists there. It leaks out. I don't need to be sold Oxford as a brand. But that, of course, that brand and its awareness must endure. And there are two ways in which it endures, I think, or maybe three. The first you've heard about. You do something absolutely stellar, and then you keep your nose clean. So Grütskier, which I can't pronounce either, did the world's first heart transplant. No one's ever going to take that away. It's always going to be known for it. And as long as it stays clean, it's always going to have a good reputation. Secondly, though, it can maintain a high level of output because we'll hear, or quality, because if we see quality slip, that will leak out in reputational slide. But equally, the smallest wobble can completely collapse a reputation, and it's virtually impossible to rebuild. And I've seen a lot of that in academic clinical work over the years. Some of us are old enough like me to remember the Bristol Heart Centre scandal. That legacy has lasted for ages. I was working at a hospital that was absolutely superb 35 years ago, when a patient hallucinated the fact that we'd all had an orgy on the floor that night wearing gold lame. I'm not quite sure why you have an orgy in gold lame, but that was reported to the daughter, who sold the story to the national newspapers, and it was on the front page headlines. And a year later, when I left, patients were still trying to get ambulances to divert away from that hospital. That sounds a bit flippant, but we do have to protect reputation if we're going to sustain it. My next reflections really were on what elements we value. And again, interestingly, when I read the report, and I did before I came here, it does ask patients and it asks staff. So you are getting feedback from those. So what elements do we value when we attribute a reputation? Firstly, I suppose the first thing is, does the organisation do the job we want it to do? So if you're an academic researcher, does it do high quality research effectively and efficiency? If you're going to collaborate with it as a commercial organisation, are they going to be able to deliver the beans when it comes to that trial? And for a patient, am I going to go in, get treated well, and come out alive and better than I went in? Does it offer value? Do I get what I'm paying for? And that, I think, relates to the NHS as well. For the taxpayer, all my money's going in and the service is, insert pejorative here, is something we're increasingly hearing. Brand, I think, does matter to some degree, and whether it's overt with a label on the front of it, like Great Ormond Street Hospital, or not, I think there is a sort of brand reputation that comes with places, and that can be quite dangerous. I hear from patients all the time, I went to see a Harley Street specialist. Anyone here knows that outside the big brand hospitals who are represented here, which are different, just because a doctor is in Harley Street means nothing more than they can pay the rent. It is absolutely not a measure of expertise or competence. And I know some doctors that I absolutely would not want to go and see that work there. But the brand helps. I put this up only because I wrote this novel a few years ago, and its original title was Reputation, because it was about an individual who presented themselves incredibly well and was technically very competent, who was actually an exceedingly evil psychopathic individual, hence the tagline there. And that matters too, because we're able to sell ourselves in healthcare by a lot of gloss sometimes, and I would point you particularly to Harold Shipman, a mass murderer who was loved by his patients. The reason he flew under the radar was because he presented himself so well. The Shipman brand was absolutely fantastic, but he was slaughtering people and getting away with it. I think what matters to patients, therefore, is sometimes a little different from what matters to us. For most patients that I meet, number one is speed. Can they get to see their doctor quickly? Do they get their appointment quickly? Do they get their operation or treatment quickly? And is it relatively seamless to do it? Do they get met at the reception by someone nice? They get seen, they're through the system quickly. And that matters disproportionately because most stuff that's treated in the NHS is going to get better on its own or is pretty trivial. North of 36% of emergency department attendances are for things that are minor, that are going to get better on their own anyway. So people will grumble if they're kept waiting, and that's 36% of ED cases. Will give you a disproportionate set of grumbling just based on I had to wait for ages and no one was particularly nice to me. From my clinical experience, patients weight test burden as a good thing. So I see not only, I went to see a Harley Street specialist, but I went to see a Harley Street specialist and I had those 5 tests all done by 2:00 in the afternoon. That is a terrible metric because most of those tests are not necessary and a lot of them are exceedingly dangerous. The patient is confused because they think this is high quality care. It's appalling quality care and it's dangerous. It's sometimes driven by laziness, stupidity, a profit motive, or maintenance of brand because someone gets the test very quickly. And it's not good. I think the most important thing probably to patients is the fact that someone cares. That's why Shipman got away with it. My younger sister died 2 years ago. Her clinical care was pretty mediocre, to be quite honest, in some elements. But the bit that's mattered most was when someone cared, when someone phoned me up about her or made the time to see me. And very often, people will rate that much higher than the quality of care. When things go wrong in a hospital, very rarely is the doctor sued if they tried their best or were felt to have tried their best. Almost invariably, patients go, because we have duty of candour, we own up if we make mistakes. But very often patients will say, don't worry, doc, I know you tried your best. So that really matters. Knowledge and expertise matter, but as I said before, perhaps sometimes a little less, because the patient generally isn't in a position to judge whether treatment A is better than treatment B, or whether they're actually getting the best treatment, or whether the outcome is any better, because they don't see the death rates inside that hospital, for instance. Healthcare professionals are much better at judging that. And looking at the reports, it's interesting that healthcare professionals seem to conflate some of those elements are important to patients as well. So the staff's user experience seems to be important too. Got a quote there, it's a question of them rating the well-run organisation. They feel that door, the service, the quality, the organisation is run well, but they also bring in outcomes as well. So again, from the report, the key bit, if I was to synthesise it, is outcomes and personal experience are things that matter. I'm not going to concentrate on this, just to say that branding is important. If you think you're the best, other people know it, either because it's leaked out, because communities talk, or because someone's got a bloody great big advertising campaign about it. And I would just point you to one small example of that, just out of interest. If you're a Brit, who's ever heard of the Whittington Hospital in North London? Oh my God, that's amazing. Well, I won't ask you why. You probably heard of it because it's terrible, but it's not. I work there. The interesting thing is that if you look at our metrics over 20 years, for most of those years, we've had the best outcomes for cardiac care, the best outcomes for respiratory care. For several of those years, the intensive care I work on had the best outcomes completely in intensive care units in Britain for case mix adjusted data. But no one's heard of it, the Whittington particularly. And inside the local community, they don't know those metrics. What gets carried is that person was rubbish, or I spent too long in ED. That could be overcome potentially with better branding. Right, finally, in my last 3 or 4 minutes, I'm going to reflect on just personal views on the key themes of what matters to an academic medical centre's reputation. And from the report comes out research and academia, education and training, patient care, and their integration. That was repeated in that report many times. It's not just they're good academically, it's not just they're good at teaching, it's not just that they're good at treating patients, it's because they combine those things to best effect. The first then is research. In this report, to me, it stood right out there as being absolutely important. Now, I suppose you'd expect that because it is about academic medical centres. But the research bit, to me, is central. And you've got to question why it's so essential. I think the first is, being an academic in clinical medicine in Britain, for sure, is bloody hard. It's an incredibly insecure career path. It's not remunerated at all. It's punishingly difficult. So if you're going to do it, it tends to attract an enriched group of highly dedicated, usually quite smart, relentlessly committed individuals who have some other purpose than just making cash. That's a valuable asset, I think, to any organisation. The second thing, of course, they bring knowledge. They are at the cutting edge of medical research. They're doing that research. They're talking to their colleagues in Oxford or abroad at the Charité in Berlin or at Goethe. And they're all trading information. And we saw this during COVID, where Britain, particularly because of its academic medical centres, was absolutely world-class in its response. World-class across the board. We got the genetics, we got the risk factors, we got the first treatments, we got the first vaccine. Britain could do that because we had the brightest and best all working in these clinical centres. We run trials that improve patient outcome. But most of you may not be aware that you want to take part in trials. One of the reasons is because even if you get the placebo, you do better. Centres that run trials provide better care. And if you're in a structured system of care provision, which happens in a trial, you will do better. And we know that research-active hospitals do better. If you have a choice, you want to go to a hospital that does a lot of research. National Institute for Health research funding nationally here very strongly correlates, it's almost a linear correlation, with patient outcomes. Those outcomes can be perception. Was my care quality good? Did people communicate with me well? Do I trust them? But they also correlate very strongly with hard metrics like death, survival rates, even over 5 years. And again, it matters even if you're not in the trials. There's one large UK trial, looked at 200,000 colorectal cancer patients, more than that. In the group of hospitals doing most research, not most patients, but most number of trials, mortality post-operatively is down by north of 1.5%. Now, that might not sound very much, but when it's you or your mum or your child, that really matters. And it's a 3.8% improvement in 5-year mortality, independently of being in a trial. So even if you're not in a trial, just visiting that hospital, your chance of surviving is 1 in 20 better at 5 years. Those hospitals do better. They leverage emerging technologies. They create international awareness, which means they can attract and recruit and retain the very best people. And they do the same with teaching. Secondly, it's about culture. And culture grows. That's the nature of cultures, isn't it? I've worked in some absolutely extraordinary hospitals. If the culture is right, any deviation or outlying that would make that worse or worse on reputation, those people disappear incredibly quickly. I worked at Bart's. I'm not Bart's loyal. I didn't train there. But St Bartholomew's Hospital was founded in 1123. It's clearly got that sort of culture there. When I worked there or when I interfaced to refer patients, the culture is one of can do, yes we will, exemplary service and being bothered. And the same, whilst Oxford, the John Radcliffe only formed I think 1972, in that how long it is, 50 years since, they have clearly established that culture and it is clearly there. This is not a wobble that Oxford at the top. They have built a culture of excellence that means if you're not excellent, you don't get recruited. If you're found to be not excellent, you get kicked out. And we, in the academic world and clinically, like to work with them. My third thought is the value of these elite brands in academic medical centres, because this is not a zero-sum game. There's a worry that the Cleveland Clinic turns up in London and hoovers up all the best brains, or Oxford John Radcliffe hoovers up all the best people that go and work there, and it deprives the rest of the NHS of competence, and if you then go to a district general somewhere else, you're in trouble. I don't believe that to be true. I think it's the opposite. I trained in some of the world's great centres and then came out of them. And I took with me the knowledge I had learned from them to my district general in North London for my clinical practice. It's a bit like the Formula One argument. You develop a racing car in carbon fibre, but it helps all of us who drive old bangers on the road. And secondly, this hub and spoke model means that a hospital like mine, the Whittington, is connected to UCL, and we benefit from the brains trust that is there and from the staff that rotate through and the students as well. So not a zero-sum game. I think that collaborative approach can also, I should point out, go two ways. And there are some very interesting data appearing that the centres of excellence that I like to think I work in may be not quite as good as some of the centres of excellence that are off the radar. If you look, for instance, at, I was looking up at the data for cataract surgery because these are well known. The average cataract operation is billed at around $2,600 in the US. It's billed at $200 if it's a humanitarian aid situation. And routine cataract surgery in India is billed at $41. But the outcomes in humanitarian aid ships or in India are better than those in North America by any metric. And yet the costs are vastly greater because there's money spent on fluff, the froth, not the substance. That's a fourfold difference. The nurturing at the top there, I will come back to. The fourth issue to the right there is about commercial translation. My reflection on this is that Britain had been slow to do this. We've been very slow to engage with the corporate and private sectors. It's no longer a dirty word. When I started 30 years ago, if you worked with a drug company, you were, out. It was a bad, dirty thing to do. Now it's not. We're very actively encouraged to do it. But we still have a public perception problem in the NHS. I consulted for DeepMind Health on AI, development in medicine, and with Google Health, who largely wound down their UK operation, and very substantially that was because of the headwinds from the general public and the popular press. This is the evil empire. This is business coming to plunder the NHS, to steal taxpayers' data, to steal your NHS from under your feet from this public system. They don't know that the NHS is run. The NHS doesn't do its laundry. That's private. The software is made by other people. The floors are cleaned by different people. All of these things are private. But that public perception of the NHS, good socialist principle, can't have anything to do with the private sector, in my mind is a major blocker. And we need to overcome that in the public if we're going to be allowed to progress. And finally, the gardening thing is my final thought, is we must protect clinical academia. It is essential. It is essential, for instance, to economies here and abroad. If you look at what AstraZeneca did with Oxford in producing the vaccine and all the other things it's done since, these are major contributors to our economy. If we wither on the vine the clinical academics, who can engage with them, who can run the trials, find the patients, originate the thought, all of that value disappears. And with it, all the value about which we've just spoken to the patient in terms of improved outcomes and so forth. And I can tell you from my own discipline, we're in trouble. I'm one of maybe, I don't know, I haven't counted, let's say 12 professors of intensive care medicine in Britain. Nearly all of us will be retiring or dying off within the next few years. That will leave 2 of a younger generation coming through. And I cannot recruit any PhD students at all anymore. I have given up trying because the culture has shifted to work-life balance. I get paid a salary for doing a 40-hour week. Why would I put myself through that punishment of the academic training that's so insecure without any financial reward at the end? Do you know what? I'm not going to do it. This is really dangerous. And the British government, for one, needs to take notice of that. And I think, alluding to the issue across the pond, America might soon find this too. I'm presenting a grant pitch tomorrow to Cancer Research UK for a study that cannot be funded in America. It could save potentially tens of millions of lives if we get this right, but it's not fundable in America because it relates to viruses and it relates to vaccination. America will do itself down on this because they will not own the IP that comes out of it. So that's where I'm going to finish, I think. I could go on. I think reputation is important. It matters to patients because of what it means. As someone said earlier on, the brand is built upon the quality that underpins it. And we've got to think about how that was derived. Fundamentally, it comes from compassion and quality of care, and it's on that we have to focus because reputation will follow. Otherwise, we're going to have a very glamorous-looking sports car with no engine under it. Thank you very much for listening.